Hello, Psych 100 students. We're off to Chapter 2 now. Chapter 2 deals with psychological research. Now, some of you are really into research, and some of you are like, boring. But without research, good scientifically based research, we would have a lot of ideas, opinions, myths that had no bearing in fact or truth. It was just something that was passed on, and we just kind of all believed it. I mean, we used to believe that the world was flat. There's still people that believe that right now. So we have to do scientific research to determine how does the Earth really look. Let's start off with this chap right here. I don't know if this is a man or a woman, but what this is a case of trephining. There's a lot of theories as to why this happened, and of course, as we covered in Chapter 1, the psychobiological perspective would have an opinion that this individual probably suffered from some type of voices in their head. To retrieve or to release the voices in the head, a hole needed to be made. Ironically, with trephination, we have found cases with multiple holes in the person's head, which tells us probably that they had the symptoms, they had the operation, early forms of psychosurgery, and maybe the voices went away for a little bit, then they came back, so they had to make another hole. It is believed that you could tell a person had multiple operations of trephination if they walked down the street and you could hear the wind blowing through their head, almost like a whistle. That's not true. I just made the last part up. Not true at all. Question for you. Who remembers the DARE program? Around 5th grade or so? The DARE program. Another question. Did it work? You don't have to answer that. Your attorney is not present. Well, the DARE program was implemented in the school systems with this idea that we go and educate kids about the perils of drug use, right? And some people protested right away. They said, look, if you bring in all these drug samples to kids, that might pique their interest and they might want them to use drugs as opposed to not use drugs, right? Well, a longitudinal study has been done on the DARE program. And of course, the key word in longitudinal is long, and it followed a group of individuals who were exposed to the DARE program pretty early on through their adulthood. And what it found was that there was no correlation whatsoever between being exposed to the DARE program and either using more drugs or not using more drugs. So it doesn't mean that the DARE program has no value whatsoever, right? If anything, it makes community connections with the police and the community, which we need more of, right? But as far as investing money in the program saying, well, this will keep kids off drugs, there's no scientific proof to that whatsoever. Now, to gather data in psychology, there are many approaches, right? We can do longitudinal studies, for example. We can speculate on why there are holes in an individual skull that we've dug up. You can also make observations. A lot of us learn from day one as infants through observation. Animals learn through observation, right? Observational study is just merely going to a natural habitat of who you're studying and make observations. Now, ideally, the individual or individuals you are observing shouldn't really be aware that you're observing them because that changes the conditions. If somebody knows that they're being observed, they may not act very normally. I've often said, well, what if we brought cameras and we're filming a new episode of the real Orange County sack style, would that change the behavior of our classrooms? And students ponder this for a minute and they say, yeah, I think so, because people would come dressed up in nice suits or gowns. Me as a professor, I might be wearing a tuxedo. And I'd say, is there any questions? And everybody would raise their hands, hoping to be on camera. It changes the dynamics of things. Now, let's suppose I want to observe the alcohol consumption of community college students. Now, I could set up a bar in a typical classroom and say, help yourselves. But that's kind of fabricated, and people kind of know, well, gosh, there's an experiment going on, because he would never bring alcohol to campus and just hand it out freely. So what I might do is do an observational study and go to a local pub or a party, and hopefully people won't see me there, and observe them. Now, the downside of observational studies is that you can lose control of the situation. You might not know that the big team game ended in victory, and so there are a lot of people consuming in celebration. You might just assume, wow, people drink freely all the time. Or the big team game, their team lost, and they're in the bar and they're drinking their sorrows away. So one has to be careful. I think a good person who learned a lot about observational study was Jane Goodall. She, with the encouragement of Mr. Leakey, got enmeshed in a chimpanzee community. She believed that the only way to really observe animals is to be amongst them. And she took her time doing it until they accepted her, and she became one of the tribe, so to speak. She increased our education through observational studies. And one of the things that she's mentioned over and over again is that one of the downsides of doing this type of research is you have to go around and ask for additional funding, because not a lot of folks see the value in that. Of course, the more we know about the animal kingdom, the more we know about ourselves. How many of you out there has filled out a survey? Survey is another way to gather incredible amounts of information. I'm constantly getting requests to do surveys on my computer or on my phone. Now, the typical surveys are, how was our service? What did you think of the food? Just talked to my cousin the other day, and he went to a restaurant, the first time he's been there, and he ordered a hamburger and soon realized it was an $18 hamburger. Hamburger wasn't bad, but he just felt not worth $18, right? You're just paying for the atmosphere of the restaurant, not necessarily the amount of the food or the quality of the food. When I was a student in college like yourselves, I received a phone call at home, and somebody said, sir, can I speak to the head of the household? Which told me a couple things. One, they didn't know who I was. Second, when I said speaking, I realized I wasn't married at the time. So they started asking me a series of questions about pizza. They said, sir, do you like pizza? I said, yes, I do. And they said, would you be willing to eat pizza for money? And I said, yeah. So they asked me about toppings and crust and so on and so forth. And they said, come this Thursday at the Holiday Inn on such and such street, and we're going to pay you $20 to eat pizza. And I said, okay. I mean, I love eating, and if somebody's going to pay me to eat, all the better. So I hung up, and right away my spidey senses went off. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. Could this be one of those episodes of Cops? I don't know if you've ever seen that show, but where they invite a bunch of folks that have arrest warrants, and once they get there, they say, we got good news and bad news. We do have pizza, but you're all under arrest because we have warrants for your arrest. And I thought, I haven't done anything. So I went down there. Let me tell you, when there's free food, I don't care, rich or poor, in between, everybody and their aunt is down there, right? There were a lot of people, I'm sure a lot more people than they invited. And they sat us in rooms and they brought pizzas without anything on the boxes, completely white boxes, and gave us the slices and gave us another survey, same questions on the phone. And they did that a few times with two or three different slices. And at the end, they paid us $20. That was that. So that was a survey, right? They were gathering a lot of information and they refused to tell us who the company was. Why? To avoid bias. BIAS. Now, some people think that means two butts. It doesn't. They didn't want any prejudgment if we liked a particular pizza company, if we didn't, to judge the pizza. We just wanted to be, here's a slice of pizza. What do you honestly think? Right? I mentioned correlation earlier. You hear correlations all the time. And whenever politicians are running, they will give you correlation. Now, let's determine what a correlation is. A correlation is a relationship between two variables. Now, there could be multiple variables, but what we're interested in is relationship between two variables. A correlation does not tell you that A causes B, although people use correlations like that all the time. They're always saying A causes B, or they imply that. Here's an example a politician might say. If you vote for me, the world will be so much better. They're trying to make a correlation. Increase votes, increase prosperity, right? It's a positive correlation. If you don't vote for me, decrease votes, decrease prosperity. That's a positive correlation. So even though things are kind of looking down, the relationship is directly related. All right, it's known as a direct relationship. So that is a positive correlation. And we know that that's not always the case. It's not always about one individual. It feels that way sometimes, but that's the message they're trying to convey to us. Now, if we were to graph this information and look carefully over history and look at correlations, a perfect positive correlation would look like this if we graphed it. A perfect negative correlation would look like this. This has positive leanings. This has negative leanings. Sometimes we do correlations and there's no relationship whatsoever to it at all. By the way, the research shows if you get vaccinations for your kids, they'll get autism. This is how the results come out, right? No correlation whatsoever, even though scientifically showing that people still believe it, right? So that's a positive correlation. What is a negative correlation? A negative correlation is an inverse relationship. Let me give you an example that might apply to you as an individual. Increase watching these videos and taking notes. Decrease your grades. Oh gosh, that's not a good example. Let's scratch that one. Increase watching Netflix programs. Decrease your grades. That's an inverse relationship. That is a negative correlation, right? You're increasing one variable, the other variable decreases. Now, is that always the case? No, because you might be watching a Netflix program that has something to do with what we're studying right now. So your grades might actually increase, producing a positive correlation. But let's face it, if you're watching so much programming and you're not doing your studies, then your grade probably is going to decrease. You're not doing your notes and so forth. Now, I could be watching Netflix right now instead of making these videos, but I know I need to take care of business. I'm just one step ahead of you. So I have to make these fresh videos for you with the intent of doing the best I can. Check out this correlation. Broken homes lead to crime. Now, is that true? Is that true? Broken homes lead to crime. I want you to ponder that, and we're going to continue with that question and that issue and think about what kind of correlation is that?